All right.
Just might want to look at like on it.
Okay.
I'll just recycle.
See? Perfect. That's awesome. All right, and we can pull this in. Yeah, just check if you receive any messages.
Yeah,
Some error.
I'll pull it up on my phone.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, guys. So, howdy, everyone.
Howdy.
How are you all doing today? All right. Does anyone of you all have exams coming up today or sometime this week? Oh, what exam?
SAM 314 Signals and Systems.
Oh, I'm actually taking that too. Are you a computer engineering major?
Yes.
Oh,
Who's your professor?
I'm taking a Dr. Leo. Yeah, which is wonderful too. Yeah, our professor is also really good. He literally reviews the homework every week it's due, so he kind of like gives a lot of hints. That's pretty cool. It's nice. So let's get started. So we have about 10 people of y'all attending in person. So as promised, those of y'all that attend in person will receive GDSC stickers. So what I do is I just stick it on my laptop right here. So what you guys can do is I'll just pass this around. Take one, or if you want to take two stickers, like you have a friend like who needs a sticker, take one for yourself and for your friend. And yeah, just have fun. I might go in a circle, so once you guys are done, and then you can just pass it to me. Let me know if y'all like it, or if you want to change the design. It'll also be cool.
You happen to send me the direct link for some reason I'm getting an error when I try logging.
Slash.
Yeah, well, I'm just like into the event link. It's not.
Oh. Is it not able to open? What's that?
I mean, if you can get it, just send me the link.
Mhm. It's the link on the officer's chat.
Yeah. Oh, is it? No. I mean, I'm just using based off that announcement, so what everyone else can.
Oh yeah, don't use that one. Use
Okay.
the one on the chat. Officer's
Okay.
chat should be fine.
Okay. It seems to be the same link. Yeah, this is the same link. Let me try this. Yeah, I'm still getting the same message. It doesn't provide me with a link.
Okay.
It's okay. I think I just communicate with all their officers that it is. If they said have anything, they just communicate through Slack.
Oh yeah, I'll just check one quick thing. All right. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Did everyone take stickers for themselves? All right, cool. Let's get started. So I'm Shreeman. I am the current Google Developer Student Club lead for our chapter at Texas A&M campus. We are present, for those of y'all who have not heard about GSC, We are a Google Developer Student Club. This is present at over 150 chapters all around North America, and we aim to bridge the gap between theory and practice. So whatever we are learning in classrooms, like Engineering 102 or all your computer science, or even your non-computer science classes, whatever you are learning in class, how do you apply it outside of class? So we have projects that you can do and work on to impact the local community. You also will be able to attend technical workshops, live panels, and study jams that help you develop skills that you need to enter the workforce. So that is what all Google Developer Student Club is about. So today's talk is going to be about cracking your technical interview. And I'd just like to know how many of y'all are having an interview lined up with a company or a startup right now. There's one. Yeah, maybe a raise of hands. One, two, three people. Okay. So even if you might not have one lined up, it's definitely going to be useful in the future when you are going to explore your different career options and when you're applying for like full time or internship positions. It's very important to kind of know like what exactly is this process about? What are some the different stages of the process? How can you prepare for the process? When should you start preparing? What are some resources that can help you out with that? So we'll be covering all of that in this bite-sized hour-long workshop. So to get started, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what technical interviews are. So this is an a way that the interviewer or the company is able to access your technical ability. So that could be an ability with a certain programming language or certain qualification that was indicated on the job qualification. Like when you're applying for a job, you're going to indicate you should be proficient in C++, Java, or data structures and algorithms. So they are going to access your technical ability. So this is usually done through a specialized, rigorous process that tests your coding skills, your problem-solving abilities, and even your personality, which is something that people get confused because there's behavioral interviews and there's technical interviews. And just because we have a technical interview doesn't mean that the behavior and the personality it's not something that's important. Like how you communicate something with the interviewer is equally as important as you knowing how to code. And last point is that the process varies. So you might be applying to like a business company like American Airlines, which does service industry, like it helps customers fly. But or you can be applying for a tech company. But know that the process varies based on company, and there are different stages to the technical interview, which I'll be covering right now. I just like to raise a very an interesting quote. Have any of y'all heard about this before? A quote by Henry Ford. So I'll kind of explain what it means. You might be perceiving it differently, but how I perceive it, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it just stuck with me so much because when I did my first technical interview for American Airlines summer internship this past summer, there was some I had to do a problem on Java, which I have never coded in Java before, and I was really unsure like how am I gonna present a solution or talk about it in an interview without even knowing what the syntax of the language is. So I was thinking, oh, I can't, or maybe I can. I wasn't really sure. But the only thing that helped was really explaining the thought process out and kind of like asking questions like, hey, I know that a vector is formed like this in C++, which I'm learning in class, but how do I form it in Java? Or how do I debug or create an instance of an object, for example? So even if you think you can't, when you just explain your thought process to the interviewer, he or she is going to see that, oh, this guy's actually confident. This person is able to communicate what, like the exact, like even though you might not know the exact answer, the right answer, but you're still able to show and demonstrate that you are qualified. So we're going to start with three stages to the whole technical interview process, and this sometimes might not be exhaustive. Some companies might just have one or two stages. So the first stage is a technical phone screen. So this is literally you using your phone. You might, when you're applying, you might have put your contact number, and they will set up a meeting with you. And usually, guys have gone through the hard part, which is basically cold applying it on the job, like basically on the website, or you approached an interviewer or a recruiter, like an SEC engineering career fair, for example, and he says, "Hey, I'm gonna have a phone call interview," and you're kind of wondering what should I expect. So this is basically how the recruiter looked at your resume, and they're like, "Oh, cool. So this guy has done a lot of leadership experiences. This guy has technical skills like agile methodologies." And it's like, "Hey, this guy's cool. I am gonna have a phone interview with him." So this stage is designed to see whether you're qualified for the position, and also if you're an enthusiastic about the company that you're going to work for. So some questions you might potentially get can be like, what made you interested to work at our company? So you can explain how the company values, the company motto, or the company's whole work culture align with you. Or maybe you heard from like, because as Aggies being an A&M, we have like a very huge alumni network, right? So we can just say, okay, I heard about this from one of my juniors or seniors, and he told me about the experience, and I found it so interesting. So you can answer it like that. Or there'll be questions on like, what excites you most about your job? Tell me more about this on your resume. So they'll kind of like talk, like help make you explain something on your resume that might be a little brief. Or what are your strengths and weaknesses? This can be like a really scary question if it comes out firsthand for a lot of y'all. So definitely preparing for it is pretty important. And one thing, this is my personal tip, is that if the interviewer like gives you the space to ask questions to the company, don't hesitate. I would say end it off by asking really important questions about a company, because ultimately you're going to spend your 3 months or 4 months, your whole summer, or your whole, like, if you're doing like a co-op or if you're doing it in the spring, you're going to spend months working at that company. So you need to know whether you are a good fit or whether you will find the whole community at that company valuable. So end off by asking questions to the company, and if really possible, connect with the recruiter on LinkedIn just so you can stay in touch after the interview. So stage two, this might be a little more, perhaps a little more scary, because you might have heard of, how many of y'all have heard about Hacker Rank or Lead Code or these kind of resources before? Raise of hands. Oh, everyone. That's really cool. How many of y'all are CS majors or computer engineering majors? Not everyone. About 50, 60%. So this basically points out that during stage two of the interview process, you would have to do like a remote coding interview or an assessment. So it can be either one or it could be both at the same time. So this is where you will be on like a virtual call, like on Teams or Zoom, and you'll be face on face with the interviewer. And he might or she might give you like a coding problem to do it on the spot within a certain time frame. Or it could be like a more commonly a timed homework type assignment, like how you're doing it for your classes, except that it's kind of like an exam. So you would have like 15 minutes or maybe like 30 minutes to kind of solve that problem and then submit it immediately to like whatever website they were saying. This could be like one problem or multiple problems depending on the company and what you're seeking for. So, any questions on what I've covered so far? Are we all good? Hanging in there? Okay, I know there's a lot of information, but I want to make this as transparent as possible based on what many people have shared about the process. So, last stage, guys. So, last stage is where this will be like a real technical interview. Sometimes this can happen in person. So you would be doing a coding challenge in front of an interviewer. The interviewer is sitting right next to you and be working through the problem like with them. So you might be given like scratch paper or a pencil or pen, and they're kind of like testing. Hey, I'm gonna give you a hard problem, but can you solve the problem even though it's hard? You might not know the exact solution or you might not even seen the problem before, but how do you break down the problem and solve it? So you're looking at more of that than that much about coding. So this could last from an hour to a couple of hours to a few days. It totally depends on the company. So I'm going to give some examples of few companies that you might have heard. Well, I'd be surprised if you have not heard of these companies, because these are in a lot of products and a lot of social media apps you're using. So we have Google, of course, Google Developer Student Club. We're affiliated with Google. So this might be like an initial phone or Google Hangout interview. It could be like 30 to 60 minutes. And then an on-site interview for about 4 hours, made up of four separate interviews. So this process can be longer because Google is also a very big company. They look for different specific skills and qualifications when you're applying for an internship or full time. So Facebook, we have a technical screening for 30, 50 minutes, an on-site interview per day. Amazon, like an initial coding assessment for 70 minutes, a phone screen for about 35 to 60 minutes, and an on-site interview. So most companies have an on-site interview as part of their interview process. And we also did one for American Airlines. So I wanted to share about how the process was for me was that I had about an hour and a half technical interview. And we know that American Airlines, they tend to come to campus a lot. That's why I wanted to point it out if you all are applying for American Airlines, that they had like a 15-minute like lead code problem kind of assignment you have to do in the first half. Like they will give you a problem and you have to solve it within 15 minutes. And they really look out for, hey, is this person explaining their thought process? You're going to give a simpler problem or a difficult problem. Like, are you explaining the thought process? And I was very clear. Whatever I do, I'm just going to explain it out, like let my thought process out. And they really liked it. So after that 15 minutes, as I just told at the start, we had like a Java debugging, which I mean, I have no experience in Java. I'm going to be honest, I've never done Java before, which doesn't make sense that I'm a junior, which and haven't done Java, but of course there's a lot of skills that we can develop. So we have like a Java debugging where you would basically be given like test cases that the program fails, and then you make like one or two changes to the code. You don't have to make it like type it out. You just have to tell the interviewer, like, hey, I think we have to initialize like an object, or we have to kind of like maybe do something to the code. You don't have to put it in code. You just have to explain it in words. And then we just combine both sections into one interview. So that was the process for American Airlines. Yeah. And even if you're all applying for any other companies at the moment and curious about like what the technical interview process might be like. You have any? Not at the moment, or maybe not at the top of the head.
I know for Uber, it's 2 stages.
Okay,
The
what is
first
it like?
The first one was 15-minute call with the recruiter,
Okay.
talk about your resume,
Mhm.
your mission, things like that.
Mhm.
Then 30-minute lead code question. Well, we use Code Signal, but it's based off lead code, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think mine was a raise. I really wasn't like really wasn't sure how to solve it because I never like done lead code or things like that. I said my process, I left comments on how I was doing it. I was script to the recruiter. As well. Then
That's
15 minutes
Mhm.
talking about the company and us, be excited about the company. How your core values resonate with the company. And I know my second one is Friday, hopefully that goes well. I think it's the same process.
Mhm. Yeah. So one thing that if I mentioned about the fact that it's 15 minutes phone call, and then there's like 30-minute late code problem. And I know it's a lot of y'all might be freshmen or sophomores, and you might not have heard about HackerRank or LeetCode. I might just be hearing about it and like just kind of struggling to get started. That's why I always tell that it's important to start preparing early if you're gonna apply for internships right now. So if you haven't applying for an internship right now and the technical interview might be lined up for maybe next spring, just starting to prepare yourself early would really help. But even if that's not the case, and during the interview, they might just end up, you might just be unlucky and they might end up throwing a problem that you've never ever seen before. Like, you might have practiced vectors and they ask you about graphs. So, how would you deal with that kind of situation? You would have to kind of ask specific questions. Like, you can say, like, vectors, hey, elements can be indexed, elements are arranged one after another. How is it different in graphs? Is it similar or is it different? It's kind of asking questions and kind of figuring out your way. So that's what I wanted to share about that. Um, so you can be applying to a range of companies. This could be like a startup or it could be a large company. And one thing that's very important is knowing who you are talking to. For a startup, it's usually like a members of like an engineering team or like a senior developer or like sometimes even the CTO could go many different directions. So usually when you set up like a interview on Google, like Google Meet or Zoom, they'll just keep an eye on like, hey, like the name of that person. Just search it up on LinkedIn and look at what position they are, just so that you know, okay, well, this person is doing all those kind of things. I want to ask questions about it. That also gives you a leverage over other applicants. So all interviewers typically have some sort of technical background and may end up with future bosses because it's a small company. So just be a little careful about what you're saying and should be fine. But also we have larger companies, like some of the companies mentioned in the previous slide. You could be talking to the hiring manager or a recruiter or a member of the engineering team. Sometimes you might not even meet them. Like it's just when I went to American Airlines, there were over 100,000 employees, and it's unlikely that that specific two people that came up in the interview is going to end up as like your manager. Sometimes they might not. So, and some of the interviewers, they might not have that much technical knowledge. They might just be there to kind of like, okay, just kind of see if you're qualified for the position. So it's very important to know what company you're applying for, what type of company, and like who you're talking to. That's something I would really do first before stepping into coding or anything else. What should I wear? Well, the fact that it's the pandemic and like all the interviews have started to move online for most companies, even if it's online, do dress smart. I know sometimes you might end up wearing like a full sleeve shirt. Like for the guys, you can wear like full sleeve shirt. They might end up wearing shorts on the bottom if it's like online or something. And honestly, you might get away with it, but it never. I feel like when you wear properly, like dress smart, it kind of gives you a little bit more confidence to present yourself more. And and something that's very important is that if you're going even for like in-person interviews, just remember to dress one level above the company's dress code. To figure out like what the company's dress code might be, I would just literally ask your friends or anyone in your network that has intern at that company. Just ask them, hey, is there the dress code like business formal every day, or can you just wear like a normal shirt and a jeans and you should be fine? And just dress one level above it. You can just wear like what you basically very simple is just wear what you wore to your career fair, just to be like 100% safe and create a nice presentation. Yep. Any of y'all have like questions about that? We're all good, smiling, happy. Okay. So what should I bring? Usually nothing besides confidence, besides showing confidence. That's what the I'd say interviewers immediately catch on to it. Like, hey, if you're confident about something and if you don't know, that's really going to stand out. Like, generally, I wouldn't say you have to bring anything. Just if it's necessary, just to be safe, you can bring scratch paper and pencil. You might need a pen or pencil to fill some admin or paperwork. Just bring some scratch paper if you like drawing things out and explaining to the interviewer. And also, printed copies of your resume is always good, just so that maybe if you're meeting, especially like if you're having an interview where you would need to pass one of your copy of your resume to the interviewer and you have one for yourself. This is actually what happened during a mock interview session that happened in this Peterson building a few weeks ago. So I gave one to the recruiters and I gave one, like, had a copy of mine so that I could refer to them as they give feedback on my resume. And that really helped improve my resume a lot more. So, and don't worry about bringing a laptop or coding samples unless they say you should bring. So yeah, that's about that. Any tips for the different stages? So I guess this is probably the most important part of the presentation, possibly something that you might be looking for. So for phone interviews or like phone screening, I would say you made it past the first big hurdle already, just getting into that stage where interviewers are reaching you out. But you want to create a good impression, right? This is the first time you're actually meeting people in a company, or might not even have known about that company before, know anyone in that company. You want to make a good impression. So start just as how Aggies meet Aggies. You're meeting someone new. Introduce yourself, who you are, what you're studying, what's your major, and if you have prepared an elevator pitch, only share it if it feels like they're asking, like, tell me about yourself. Just have an elevator pitch ready. Be excited about a company or project that you're working on. So you can definitely share about the company values, like he was explaining, company motto, what aligns with you. Know your audience, whether what company you're working for, and who you're talking to. That's important. Be honest. If you don't know, this is probably the most important point. You might have things, sometimes it's very common, like you put things on your resume that you might not be like super up to date or super skilled in, and you might have forgotten because maybe I had done it in high school like 3 4 years ago. But when they, like, if they ask you about it, just be honest, like, I've done it 3 or 4 years ago. I did this project, but I am not like very updated with the skills currently. So by being honest about it, it makes like a really good impression that okay, this person is not lying about their qualifications. This person is honest about it. This point is really important. And also answer by showing and like basically kind of like not telling. So each time your interviewer asks you a question, be sure to share like at least one experience. I heard this quote uh, some time ago, like, don't tell a story without sharing a point, don't share a point without telling a story. But I mean, that's in the context of like public speaking, but in the context of interviews, make sure that you are showing your experiences while you're bringing up a point, because that really, like, your resume is going to like paint one picture of who you are, but when you speak it out like in a different way, it picks a whole different picture. That's what you want to show to the interviewer. Yeah. For the coding assessment, it's all about testing your abilities. Definitely start preparing at least 1 to 2 months in advance so that you're adequately prepared for it and fully understand the problem. At the end of this presentation, we'll be doing a simple lead code problem. So I'll kind of break it down to you what it means to fully understand the problem. And then plan out your code before writing it out. I mean, this could be like writing pseudocode or kind of drawing it out to understand how to solve the problem. And take your time. This depends. If it's not timed, make sure to take your time and really break it down. Don't feel rushed to find like the most efficient solution. Yeah. And for the on-site interview, so you made it to the final stage of the interview. So congratulations about that. So now it's very important for the on-site interview to think out loud and ask clarifying questions before you write the code. Because there's gonna be like a big problem statement in the interview or like something you've never seen before. And if you don't ask clarifying questions at the start, you might get a totally wrong, like might be going towards a wrong solution, and you might be ending up wasting time. And I don't want you all to fall into that trap. That's why I just ask clarifying questions or just speak out your thought process as you go. Third point, I would say have a good primary language you're strong at. So how many of y'all are have done Java before? Okay, 4 people. How about Python? Okay, a lot more, almost 90, 100%. How about maybe C++? Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's good. So you all have a certain language that you're good at or you have done before. Have a primary language that you're good at. But just in case that you would have to implement it in a different language, maybe you want to do it to impress the interviewer, or the interviewer asks you, hey, could you implement this in Python? Just make sure that you have a secondary language ready, but still focus on a primary language. Just keep this as a backup. Just know the syntax of it and speak clearly and precisely when they ask you a question. Even if you don't know the right answer, just speak whatever comes to mind so that they at least know that, okay, you're not like scared by the fact that they asked a very difficult technical question. You just managed to be confident and answer it. All right, so coming towards the end of the presentation, so what are some topics that might be asked for a technical interview? So first of all, the ones that I highlighted in bold, the reason why I highlighted in bold is if you have not had much programming experience or you're just starting to use HackerRank, LeetCode, or starting to program, I would say focus on these bolded ones first to start off. I've seen that most of the technical assessments I did, they use vectors and like iterating, being like running for loops or while loops and trying to figure out the indexes, or solving problems through iteration, or using arrays in iteration. I've seen that very, very commonly. So I would recommend studying that. If possible, you can study this together with pointers. I know this can be a little challenging if you have not heard of pointers before, but this is something that they will test you in an interview. So it's the bolder ones. I'd focus a little more on that. And if you have more time, I would focus on the non-bolded ones like matrices, linked lists, queue stacks, heaps, sets, hash maps, trees, binary search, and all of this that I put on the slide. So how many of y'all have taken, if you're in CS major, how many of y'all have taken 221, data structures and algorithms? Right, 3, 4, 5, 6, including me. So most of the things that you would be learning in that class is really important. If you're a CS major, that would teach you all of these different structures and different algorithms you can use on each of these different data structures. But even if you're not a CS major, what can you do? There are LinkedIn courses that apply it in a language of your own. It could be in Java, or it could be in, besides C++, sometimes even in Python. This could work, especially arrays and iterations. You might be doing an engineering 102. That is still good. Keep that. And there's many alternative ways of learning data structures and algorithms. There are a lot of free courses, like Free Code Academy on the YouTube channels. I'll definitely keep a lookout on that as you're applying for or preparing for the interview. And yeah, so programming languages mentioned C++ is something that Texas A&M focuses a lot, C++ and Python. But you also can do Java, Ruby, Go, C. Definitely look at the company job description because that would tell you like what languages that they are using in the in the industry at that company, because you don't want to prepare in Go or Ruby and you end up having to code in Python or C++, and you might kind of get stuck. So just keep a lookout on that, or ask a question or email someone. So before I go to the actual lead code problem, I just want to end it off with a small code that which is based off the fact that be clear about the goal, but flexible about the process of achieving it. And I didn't really tag anyone. I think it's just that um, all developers or anyone who's doing a technical interview, just keep this code in mind, because you can have very difficult technical interview problems or questions that the interviewer might do like ask you and you're just stuck. But what if you can just explain your thought process out to them, like what am I thinking of right now? I know this but I don't know that. When you explain the process of it, you're still being able to show that okay, you might not be like completely qualified for that position, but you're still able to put that effort. And that really keeps you, even if you applied for it the following year, you're going to be more successful and you're going to remember you for that. So if we keep this in mind, and yeah, let's practice. All right. So, how many of y'all have done two sum before? Yeah, one person, two people. Okay. And if you're done or if not done, this is a really cool problem to actually explore, because this can be implemented in many different languages. I usually use C++ because that's one I'm familiar with. So I'm looking at this problem in an interview, and I'm kind of looking at this like, okay, given an array of integers nums and an integer target, return indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. So one thing I like to do is, okay, I'm giving, sometimes the problem statement can be like paragraphs of paragraphs. What I like to do is just jump to the examples and look at like, because examples help me understand what's happening. So, okay, so I'm given an input nums. This is like a list or an array, or it can be a vector depending on how you implement it. So I'm looking at this. Okay, so I see this and I see this is a target. Why could it be? The output is 0 and 1. So, okay, 0 and 1, these are the indices. 2 and 7, they add up to 9. Okay, so basically I'm taking two elements in the array and I'm summing it. I'm checking if it is equal to the target that's been passed in or it's not. Okay, so I got a general idea of what's happening. Now I'm going to look at certain assumptions or certain conditions in the problem that you have to be aware of. So I assume that each input would have exactly one solution. What can someone infer from this? What are the thoughts that are running in your mind when you see that input would have exactly one solution? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Exactly. You're right. So once you find a solution that satisfies the condition it's equal to target, you can just stop it right there, so you don't have to continue doing or iterating or trying to find a solution. So yeah, so these condition, that tells you one thing. And what about second one right here? What is it trying to say? What comes to your mind when you read that sentence? Yeah, even if y'all don't know, just raise your hand and give a suggestion. This is your chance. Okay, go ahead.
Maybe that if you're iterating through a loop, make sure you don't use the same index for the first and the second part. It can be the same element twice.
So it can be the same element twice because you can't use the same index. So you might have to use different indexes as well within the code, which is correct. And also same element twice. So it basically means that you can't just take 2 plus 2 or 7 plus 7. So there is supposedly like a nested loop that you would have to do in your code. So this is just an inference that I have. So with that, I am going to step into the code and kind of figure out what to do. So I've written one for a brute force algorithm, which is a rather very intuitively and easy to understand. So if you're not familiar with C++, I'm going to kind of bring you through the code a little bit. This is a vector. This can treat it as like a list of integers. And this is, you're just defining a function which takes in an array or like a vector and a target that is specified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a for loop from the first element at index 0 all the way to the last element. And then inside that, I'm going to have another for loop that is going to compare it starting from the element after it all the way to the end. And what can someone think of a reason why we're not starting this from 0? Sorry? Yeah, you already checked that stuff. And also, you don't want to check the same element again. Like how they were mentioning, you can't, like if you have the same element, you can't sum itself again. So you're going to start with the index after it and continue. So you're going to run another for loop. And you're basically going to check if at that index, j, is it equal to target minus num psi? This is just basically the same as this plus this is equal to target, but I've just written it differently. And then you're just going to return the indices that correspond to it. If not, if this code, and once it returns, it's very important, once we return, like someone was mentioning, it's just going to end the function right there. And of course, it's very important that what if there's no solution? That's something that we might not have thought of. That could be, how do you deal with that? What if none of the elements add up to 9? Then you would just return like a default case, like -1, to make sure that the function has a return statement that's independent of any conditions. So yeah. So that's a simple implementation for the toSum. There's often a more better way. I wouldn't say better way, but a different way to implement it using a hash table or like a map. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a map is basically something that literally it's like mapping one value to another. So you're going to have a map object that has mapping one integer to an integer, kind of like you treat it kind of like a dictionary, like a key value pair. And then you have a vector, and you're going to just kind of loop through the vector. And you're going to get the complement, which is basically like if you have 9 and you have 4, then complement is going to be 5. Basically what you need to add to make it target. And you're going to run you're going to run some functions. Something I want to point out here, you might not know all these functions right here. Usually the interviewer would allow you to use like cppreference.com or C++ reference websites during the interview. So you don't have to worry about, hey, do I need to memorize these functions? You don't have to, right? So map.find complement is not equal to map.end, which means that, okay, I have not reached the end of the map, so I've stopped somewhere in the middle. And if that's the case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push back map find the complement, and I'm going to push the second. Second refers to, so this is first, and this is second. So I'm going to push second into pairs, and I'm going to also push back I. I'm just going to break out of the loop. And then at the end of this, we're going to do a map.insert here in nums I. So nums I represents a value at that certain index in the vector, and then I is actually the actual index. So it's basically that's basically what we're going to put in the map. So this represents nums I and this represents I. And then at the end, we have to return the pairs so that we're able to print it out. Yeah. So this might seem a little complicated if you have not heard what maps are. So this is just one implementation. Again, back to the code, be flexible. So if you want to use the brute force or you want to use the hash table, both works. Sometimes they can ask you a question about what's the runtime or what is the space complexity or time complexity. Sometimes you might have to answer questions like that. Just be aware. So for the brute force, for example, if you have not heard of what time complexity is, it's basically like how basically like if you were to change the input size, how much more time would it take for the algorithm to complete? So in this case, general rule is that okay, you have a for loop and you have a for loop. This for loop, what is the maximum number of elements that it can iterate through? Is basically going to be the total number of elements in the vector, right? It's going to loop from the start to the end. And the same for this. In the worst case, it's going to start from 1 and it's going to go all the way to the end of the vector. So it's kind of, for large values of n, it's just going to be like n elements and n elements. But since for each of the n element, you are like, for each of the n different elements, you're running it n times. So it's n times n, which is n squared. So this is an O n squared time complexity. And sometimes they can ask you a question like that. So just don't be, you just kind of explain your thought process like how I did, and that would really help you out. Yeah. Last tips, I would say prepare the elevator pitch for the classic tell me about yourself question. This can be a little scary, but just when you have like maybe like a small paragraph you've written, just kind of like have it in handy. You don't have to say word for word, just have a reference to the elevator pitch. Know your fundamentals. Yes, fundamentals. Maybe taking engineering 102, or just kind of based on your experience. Practice, practice, practice. Start early. The earlier you start, the better you'll do. Pick one programming language you know really well. So some of y'all are mentioning Java, C++. Definitely know the syntax of all the different loops and how to initialize objects and how to initialize arrays and all that. Do mock coding interviews. This was something that's very useful. Usually, the Industrial Affiliates Program or Career Center, they have a lot of sessions for this. Do attend this mock coding interviews, or even just a mock interview, just to put yourself in that space of having to answer and break down questions, because that's really going to show what are your weaknesses, how can you improve, and you're also able to receive feedback. Yeah. Yeah, just be confident and know that whatever you have prepared, you'll do well for the interview. So, I'd like to share some social media links and where you can come and stay connected with our community, hear about our upcoming events, and also just connect with our officers and like just kind of chill with us. So we have our Slack. We mostly post about our event announcements, and our officers are all there. We also have a mailing list where you can specifically subscribe to all the events that we're going to have. We have a LinkedIn, Facebook, we even have a YouTube channel with all the recorded videos of our whole, like all the past events that we have had. And we also have Instagram where we post flyers and member spotlights so you can find out more about our officers. One thing I would like to mention is that sometime at the end of this week, we are going to have a raffle where basically if you were to, we'll be like sharing the instructions specifically on Instagram, but if you were to win the raffle, you'll be able to have your LinkedIn profile reviewed by an expert who has who has been who has like been affiliated with Google specifically. Her name is Renee Capella. She was one of our panelists for our previous panel, and she volunteered to actually look through your LinkedIn profile and give you valuable feedback so that you can, when you're applying for internships, you can boast about it. So the raffle is going to come up soon. Five up to three lucky winners would be eligible for that. So I really recommend you all to stay in touch with our social media. Yeah. So that's all we have for today. Does anyone of y'all have any questions for us?
First, do you think it's more common to have a question specify specific coding language to code to them, is it more likely that they just ask you the question and you choose the language?
I would say the second one is more common. They would not, ideally, companies don't want you to restrict you to a certain language because that kind of, you might not be 100% like versed in that language. They would usually give you the problem and you would be able to choose the language that best suits the problem or just the syntax that you're most familiar with. So yeah, you'll have that freedom.
And then my second question.
Yeah.
If you're like in like the second stage or something where it might be in person, are you allowed to bring your own laptop, or will they like provide some form of computer to interface with? Like you can use your own ID essentially.
Oh, for the IDEs. So I would say it depends on the specific company that you are like you're basically interviewing for. Usually they would not require you to like usually they would have like the resources ready. Sometimes they can ask you to type it out on a Google Doc. Usually might not always be an IDE because the IDE kind of gives you hints or certain tricks. So just to be safe, they would ask you to write it out on scratch paper or stuff. So that's something we might want to think about. Yeah. Any other questions for us? Are we all good? Yeah. So, so I'm kind of current Google Developer Student Club lead. We have Vyam Gupta right here. He's our vice president, and he is in charge of taking care of a lot of the collaborations and the internal, like, small affairs that our club has, making sure all the events run smoothly. So we have two other officers. If you have not met them, Anjali, she's our marketing director. We also have Paula, our webmaster, as well as Drew. He's our project manager. We'll be starting projects really soon. We're starting to reach out and kind of contact NGOs. And once we're able to do that, you'll be able to sign up for projects and start getting involved. So as usual, we'll be meeting every Wednesday, or no, I would not say every Wednesday, next Wednesday. We have planned to have an intro to Flutter event. If that's something that interests you, it's a web development framework. So you can learn a new technical skill and work on an actual hands on assignment. So if you're interested in that, you can come for it. If not, we don't have any membership dues or requirements. Feel free to come to any of our events. Yeah. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
You all have a good evening.